Proverbs chapter 27. We'll begin in verse 1. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. A stone is heavy, and the sand weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than them both. Wrath is cruel, and anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy? Open rebuke is better than secret love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. The full soul loatheth an honeycomb, but the hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. As a bird that wandereth from her nest, so is a man that wandereth from his place. Ointment and perfume rejoice, the heart so doth the sweetness of a man's friend by hearty counsel. So here we see probably the two main themes in those passages are humility and friendship. And so it begins here, it says, boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. And so, the caution there is to not make plans that are in no way able to be changed because we don't know what tomorrow holds. It's the Lord's, and we depend on Him. And if we depend on Him, then we can make it through. And so, obviously there we go through Proverbs, we see there are times we need to plan, and we don't need to act without plans, but we also need to know that plans are subject to change, and that we can't always count on things being the way we want them to be. Just this morning, had a coworker talking, and he said, we're talking about the future, whatever, and he said something about, I just don't see it happening that way. And I said, yeah, a year ago, there's a lot of things I didn't see happening that way. And so the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen. And we know that as well as any time in my life, that things can change tomorrow, the year can change, and we may be doing things completely different. We may, all of those things. And so there's a humility that has to be there to say, I'm going to make plans, and I'm going to work towards those plans, but I'm also going to put it in God's hands and just say, I'm there. Because the day we may wake up tomorrow and everything we had planned for the day goes in a different direction. And so we just have to be humble enough to put it before God and say, you know what, that's not what I planned, but I want to live for you and glorify you. We can't get so caught up in how we think it should be, or how we had planned it to be, or how we want it to be, that we don't take what God has given us. It is kind of like that saying, that if life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And sometimes we do that. We have to see, because we don't see everything God sees, and we don't see it from His perspective. I'm always reminded of the book of Habakkuk. If you remember, there's a verse there in Habakkuk 1:4, I believe, but it's God tells Habakkuk really asks the question, God, how long? How long will you let your people get away with sin? He wasn't talking about the rest of the world. He was talking about the Jews. How long? And God says, I'm doing things among the nations now you wouldn't believe. And we hear that quoted all the time about God's got this great future. But what God was saying is, I'm doing things out there, and I'm fixing to bring my discipline on my people. You don't worry about them. But through the exchange with Habakkuk and God, through that, God says, I've got a plan, and it's going to look really, really, what he's telling Habakkuk is, I'm fixing to do some things, and they're going to look really bad. And it's going to look like I've abandoned my people if you don't know what's coming. But I'm going to tell you what's coming. The Assyrians are coming, and they're going to take over, and they're going to take the people out of the land. And then the Babylonians are going to come and take over them, and then the Babylonians will fall. He said, I'm not going to let them get away with doing that to my people, but I'm going to use them to discipline my people. He said, and when all of that's worked out, that's when all that's going to happen. And so we don't always see, and sometimes things look really bad, and we have plans, and we think we understand this has to be God's will, and things turn and things change. And so I think we need to remember that sometimes God uses those things that look antithetical to his direction, and he uses them to bring his people in the right direction. And so things change. We need to be ready for that, and we need to trust God that even when it looks bad, we trust him. Verse 2 says, let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. And here again, that humility that we let others praise us. We let others lift, give us, say that. I think the easiest way to understand that, we know that, right? We know that naturally, because if you buy anything online, right, what do? You look and you read the manufacturer's description of that product, and you think, that's exactly what I need, that's exactly what I want. And what's the next thing you need to do? You go read the reviews of that product, right? And which counts more, the reviews or what the manufacturer said, right? Which one are you going to trust? The guy that says it's okay, but it's not really what I thought I was getting, or the manufacturer says this is exactly what you need, and so, or maybe somebody says, hey, that is better than they made it sound to be. You're like, oh, well, he said that. Then if somebody, he's not benefiting from it, then that. And so the same is true for ourselves, that we let others speak for us. We let our actions speak for themselves, if you will. And we have the humility to do that. And sometimes that's difficult because, somebody else is talking for theirself. And they catch the attention, and they catch the praise. But the problem is, just like with that product that the manufacturer is really hyped, that he hypes it up, and then somebody gets it and they're like, well, I guess it got the job done, but it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Or the movie, you always see this with movies. I had somebody tell me the other day about a movie. They said, you seen that movie? And I was like, no. And they said, if you watch the trailer, you've seen the whole movie. And it said, every good part of the movie, the whole plot, it's all in the trailer. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the movie. And I think sometimes all the good stuff, when people sing their own praises, is out front. But when we allow others to, it may take time for people to see that things are working in our life and how things are going. But eventually, when it comes to fruition, it's strong and it stands. We see this in the life of Joseph, right? Joseph worked hard. He did what he needed to do. We see he obeyed his father, right? He obeyed God. And where did it end up? He ended up in a pit. He ended up sold to slave traders. He ended up as a slave in Egypt. But the next thing you know, he's over the whole household. But because he didn't sing his own praises, he ended up in prison. And no matter what he said, he was in prison. But when a servant of Pharaoh saw who he was, saw his character and his ability, and went back to Pharaoh and reported it, it lifted him up out of that. And he was able to do good things for those who had betrayed him. And so we see that picture of letting others do that. It sets a foundation that's much firmer than if we sing our own praises. Verse 3 says, a stone is heavy and the sand weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than them both. And so here it says, a stone is heavy and sand weighty. And so that picture of having to carry a heavy weight, if you want to carry a weight, make a sandbag, carry rocks in the bag, and you make this weight and you weight something down, we see that when you, and so you add the weight, but he says what's weightier than that? It says the wrath of a fool, and that we don't need to, in humility, we don't need to put ourselves in the wrath, under the wrath of a fool unnecessarily. We don't need, when foolish people do foolish things, it's not always our job, unless it's to protect somebody else, to step up and make them right. So, we don't put ourselves in foolish situations. There's a guy on the internet who talks about self-defense, and he says one of the key rules to self-defense is stay away from stupid places at stupid times with stupid people. He said if you can do that, you'll stay out of most trouble. And he, he's talking because he talks about it because he shows videos of people that get themselves in trouble. And if you're in a bar hanging out with drunks at 2 a.m, you're just waiting on trouble. I mean, it's you're looking for it, and so that's the picture that if we don't have to be there, we're not there. Because why? Because the wrath of a fool, they're going to be wrathful. This person wasn't put in this situation. I watched another video of a guy who's a championship MMA fighter. Okay, so this guy can grapple and fight with the best of them. And he had a man break in his house, and he said he fought with that guy. Now this is an untrained guy breaking his house. He said, I fought with him until the police showed up. He said, I've never fought that hard in my life. And he said, it's because that guy was too crazy to give up. And so the same as the picture there is, when a fool starts something up, it's not your job to get in the middle of it. And that we let that come upon them. Obviously, there are times when we have to step in and stop for safety reasons, stop somebody from hurting somebody else. But the picture here, if you can just let them walk off, let them walk off. If somebody wants to come and insult you and call you names and all those things, and let them walk off. You don't have to prove them wrong, right? They're acting foolish. You don't have to prove them wrong and start something that's heavy, because here, you can end up in a position where you have to do something you don't want to do or need to do. And so that can actually come back. It says that's a heavy weight. It says it's better just to carry the weight, the burden of hey, whatever, you go on. And than it is to carry that weight of to have that wrath and that fight that you may not want. And so he says that can be heavy. Verse 4 says, wrath is cruel, and this kind of goes along with it. The wrath is cruel and anger is outrageous, but who is able to stand before envy? So this is another. People want to get you riled up, so they start something, right? Wrath, there's this wrathful anger that comes out. And someone belittles you, someone shames you, someone tries to do all these things that may, and And we want to do, what do we want to do? We want to prove them wrong, prove I'm right, prove, this, and envy. That idea of envy, that I'm not going to have this foolish person come off looking better than me. And the scripture says, look, that's hard. That'll get you in trouble. Envy will get you in trouble as quick as all that other. All that other we can handle, we can put it off. But envy, if we allow it to get in our heart and allow it to envy to get in and to that picture, and it will turn us into who they are. It will turn a sane person foolish, envy and jealousy in that. And so we have to be really careful with those things, and we have to be aware of that. Say, is this out of envy or jealousy, or why do I want this or want to do this, or why is, we have to judge ourselves, judge our motives in that, because envy and jealousy will lead us down some dark roads if we allow it. And so we have to be careful. Wrath and anger, they're bad. They're bad. Jealousy will destroy you from the inside out. Right? So you face somebody's wrath and anger, you face maybe physical violence and verbal violence, and maybe even what some call social violence, bullying. But if we allow envy in our heart because we want to be like them, or we want to have the power they think they have, or all of those things, then we have been conquered on the inside. And so we have to have humility enough to say, I'm not going to fall in that. Right? Isn't that where envy and jealousy and covetousness comes from? Is pride. I deserve that. Right? The Bible says don't covet. I deserve what that person has. It should be mine. And that's kind of where covetousness comes from. And so we have to be careful not to covet, not to be envious, not to be jealous. In the 10 Commandments, you look at all 10 of those commandments, from the first down to the 9th. All the first 9. Well, the middle, let's say the middle 8. Right? The first one, have no other gods before me. And then the last one, thou shalt not covet. They're bookends. Those two are in the heart. The others are actions that come out of the heart. And so that idea of covetousness, that's the one that destroys the heart. So we really have to be careful with envy and jealousy there. And so we see that there's a humility that does that. If we're humble enough to say, what I have, what God has given me, that's enough. I can be content with that. The situation God's put me in, I'm not going to like it, but I can live with it because God's put me there, and I can be content in the fact that I know that I'm not here by accident, and that I can serve Him from here. And so we need that humbleness to be the humbleness of a servant. And we see that through all of those verses, that idea of the humbleness of a servant. And you think about Christ in all of those situations, His humbleness that came through, of one who, He faced every day. We think, well, he knew what was coming. Well, yes, but I'll be honest with you. Some days I'm kind of glad I didn't see that coming. I'm glad I didn't have to dwell on that all day or all week or all month. But he faced life. He faced it in humility. He never, praised himself. There are declarations of his deity, but he didn't do it in boastfulness. He did it in the way that was factful. He didn't say, come bow before me, I'm God. He says, God has promised you He would come, and He is here. In that sense that he opened the opportunity for others to see him and to know him as God. He wasn't boastful, and he was in humility. He didn't engage the foolish. I think that's one of the wisdom we see in Christ. The wisdom we see is how he would get asked questions that, from his point of view and from God's point of view, were just foolish questions. The Pharisees and the Sadducees would try to trick him, and he would give an answer that wasn't wrathful. That they had the political power over all the people. They're the ones, think about this, the temple. That was his temple, where he was to be worshipped as God. They're the ones who had the say in that temple. But he never envied them for that. Can you imagine his humility to go into that temple, to see their false worship, and to stand there and then to teach and amidst that in humility, without envy, without strife? That's the heart humility that ought to be in us. And so we ought to be humble before him. And then verse 5, begin to look at the idea of friendship. And it says, open rebuke is better than secret love. And so obviously it's better to have a friend tell you that you're wrong than have a friend who loves you through everything but never tell you that. And so we just need to remember that when people correct us, sometimes that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And it's much better. And for us to correct others, it's better to correct out of love than to never express any love. I mean, that's no love. And so it says it's better, open rebuke is better than secret love. And so verse 6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And kind of the same picture there, that it's better to have a friend who loves you and cares for you to correct you, to say, hey, you got it wrong. Hey, you're doing wrong. Hey, that's not where you need to be. Hey, you need to do this or do that. You know, and make those calls in your life, and to say that, you know, to call you out on things, than it is, you know, it says, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. And so that you know, obviously an enemy who would lie to you and tell you what you want to hear, and, you know, say what you want to say, only to lead you astray. It says it's much better to have a friend that's going to be tough on you than to have an enemy to be sweet to you and lead you astray. And so, because one leads actually to better circumstances, the friend, where the enemy might be, you know, good getting there, it's ultimately to destruction. And so we need to remember that. Verse 7 says, the full soul loatheth honeycomb, but to the hungry soul every bitter thing is sweet. And so, you know, we remember that when we're full, even the good things don't taste that good. But it's when we're hungry that any old thing will do. And so, you know, that we don't need to take for granted the things we have, the good things we have. Sometimes I think we do. I think we you know, especially friendships or family or those things that sometimes it's easy to get upset with or to get frustrated with. I mean, you know, most of the time it's easier to get frustrated with somebody you're close to, somebody you love, than it is somebody you don't even know. And the same action from a loved one will frustrate you and cause you more anguish than somebody you don't know. And I think here we say, you know what, that when when you're that we don't need to take that for granted just because we're full, just because we have it, just because it's there all the time. And that we need to, and that because when you don't have it, it says even the bitter things are sweet, or there are, when we see that too, that there are those who don't have friends and loved ones they can really depend on, that really love them. And that, I think a lot of times that leads people into relationships that are unhealthy, even abusive, that they don't, it's just all the sweet they have. It's all they have, and they take it. They're hungry for it. I think the other thing too is we have a world that's full of bitter, but they're so hungry for the truth they think it's sweet. And I think many times in the church we're so full, we know the truth. It's so much, a lot of us have grown up in church, we know the truth. It's so much a part of us that we take it for granted. And it's just the way things are. It's just the way we look at the world, because that's the way we've looked at it most all our lives. And so we forget, and so we need to remember that as we deal with the world, and we need to say, hey, I have something that's really sweet for a world hungry even for the bitter things. And so remember that. And then I think the other part of that too is, that if we get, I guess the reverse of that is true, in the sense that we have a world also that is fed such sweet lies by the devil, but yet they're hungry for truth. That even when the truth is a little bit bitter, I think there's many in this world who would think it was sweet because it really is true. And so we need to remember that. And so anyway, verse 8 says, as a bird that wandereth from her nest, so is a man that wandereth from his place. And here's one we need to lock onto, and I just, to be honest, probably preaching to the choir tonight in a sense, but believers need to understand there is safety in the church of Jesus Christ. To meet with the church, to worship with the church, to pray with the church, to fellowship with the church, to work in mission with the church, there's safety there. Safety from sin, in the sense that it encourages us in our walk, it encourages us in our life, and that it makes us less vulnerable to the world because we work and do these things together. It's the way God designed us as believers. He saves us individually, but He saves us into His church, into His people, to be His bride. And so in that we come together. And if you've ever known anyone who's kind of slipped off into sin, right? When they first start, what's usually the first visible evidence there's sin creeping in their life? They start missing church, right? Right? They miss Sunday school. They come in regular, come to everything. Every time the door's open, then they miss Sunday school a week or 2 weeks. Then they're just at church once or twice a month. For long, they're not there at all. They've always got a reason or excuse, but they slip, and before long, their sin is out in the open. And I'm not sure if every time sin draws them away, or sometimes as much as they let themselves be drawn away and they end up in those sins. Because many times if you talk to them, when they come back, if you talk to them, they're like, well, this major sin that I got caught in, it didn't start before I left the church. But I let my heart drift away from the church, and that sin crept in. And so the same is true. It's just like a bird away from its nest, right? They got that nest up high, and and where the other animals can't get to their nest, and all. And if you've ever watched baby birds learn how to fly out of a nest, it's always that mama bird will run them out of that nest. But you know what? A lot of times, the first few she'll get out, she'll just kind of, and they'll go. And it seems like that last one doesn't want to go, and she'll eventually make it go. But she'll try not to peck on it, because she knows. And here's the thing: if they don't fly, they hit the ground, and most of them will survive it if it's not too high. But if they hit the ground and can't fly, they're vulnerable to predators. And so that's dangerous, and that's kind of where we are when we go outside the fellowship of the church, we go outside the fellowship of Christian friends, and we become alone in our walk with Christ. We don't have those to prop us up or to help us carry through, or even to help them. We become vulnerable to the world and to sin. And so that's the warning there. Verse 9 says, ointment and perfume rejoice the heart, so doth the sweetness of a man's friend by hearty counsel. And so he just, this idea of ointment and perfume, I'm going just not to be too graphic, but came in tonight and I was glad to get this mask off, because I ate supper and I drank coffee with my supper, and I could smell it on my mask, right? And you just couldn't. And so, and it smells a lot worse when you breathe it back out than it does before you eat it. So anyway, but imagine you lived in a day when baths weren't common as they are today, and for lots of reasons. And work was a lot dirtier than it is today for most people. And so the idea that you get cleaned up and you put on your good smelling stuff, and you're right, and even today now, you get cleaned up, and you get your good smelling stuff, you're going somewhere now. You're not just going to work or sit and watch TV. You're dressed up, you think something exciting is fixing to happen, it's ready to go. That's the picture there, that you're all cleaned up for a special occasion. It's the thing. He says, and so doth the sweetness of a man's friend by hearty counsel. And so when we face tough days, tough decisions, when our hearts are troubled, is there somebody you can go to and you say, hey, look, this is what's going on? And when you walk away, you feel like you just had a bath. You just, the weight and the filth of it just feels better. It just feels cleaner, just feels lighter, just feels, because they've given you good counsel, and you know it. You know you can trust their wisdom because you know it's godly wisdom. And there are people, we need those people in our life. We need to look, because it is, right? Your trouble's not gone. Your day hadn't gotten better in the sense other than now you've got to talk it out with somebody who may have a little bit of insight or a lot of insight. But yet you walk away refreshed and renewed, just like you shower and shave and perfume and cologne or whatever, you're refreshed. And we need those people. We need those friendships, and we need to be those friends to people. We need to be that. And that ought to be something. We want to be somebody can come to and say they feel like they've been filled up and renewed and refreshed when they come to us. And then verse 10 says, thine own friend and thy father's friend forsake not. Neither go into thy brother's house in the day of thy calamity, for better is a neighbor that is near than a brother far off. And so here it says, don't forsake your friend and don't forsake your father's friends. And it's in the picture there is make friends where you can make them. Make good friends. Be a good friend. Because we all need those people in our life. We all need those who we can call on. And we need to be one somebody can call on. Here it says it's better. So that idea of that. And so the idea of having a friend and don't forsake them. Don't say, well, that's so-and-so's friends. We read in Scripture, Solomon, in all his wisdom, y'all know what? He had a group of godly men that counsel him too. That's part of his wisdom, is he had that. And when his son took his throne, you know what his son did? He sent them all on their way. And his son faced this kingdom split. And so we need to remember that we need all the friends we can get. We need all the good counsel we can get. Those people who are true friends, we need to hang on to them. And so he says, hang on to that. And he says, he says, neither go into thy brother's house in the day of calamity, for better is a neighbor that is near than a brother is far off. When we make friends, we need to make friends that are friends. And what I mean is we need to be a friend that's a friend. And we need to do that in a way what we want to be. And it needs to be one that imagine you have a family member who lives away, and you face a problem. Your friend who's close ought to be your first option. He's saying, make those kind of friends. Be that kind of friend, that others will come. And he says, do that. That's better. Somebody that's there is better than somebody that's never there to try to get just because they're kin. He says, it's better to have a friend who's a true friend than someone who just happens to be blood kin. And depend on that. And so, old saying, blood is thicker than water, but the truth is there are a lot of friendships that are thicker than blood. And so we need to remember that, and we need to be that. And that's kind of a picture of what the church needs to be. And we think about that even in Christ, that humility and friendship. If there's anything that says humility and friendship in all of history, it's the cross of Jesus Christ, where the King of Heaven took on the filthiness, sin of man out of humility. And he did it out of friendship, right? No greater love is this, than a man lay down his life for his friends, and I call you friends. That's our model for friendship. That's our model for humility. And again, those two things go hand in hand. We're only good friends when we're modest and when we're humble. And we're, and somebody who's humble and honest, they'll make a good friend. And so that's what we need to remember. The humility and friendship that we've been called to, and that we've been demonstrated in Christ in order that we would live that way and share that good news.